Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cells Part 2. We finished up earlier talking about the adaptations of root hair cells for absorbing water. We're going to move on from looking at the actual cells and how they're specialized to actually looking at the methods by which things and substances and water actually move around between cells. That's really, really important, kind of a few very important ideas. Okay, as soon as I can get this to change. Okay, fantastic. All right, so the first one, of course, is looking at diffusion. We've seen diffusion before at key stage 3, but we now need to remember a very, very set definition for diffusion. So let's try and work towards the actual definition by looking at and seeing what's happening. So you can see here in this series of beakers up here that you've got water and potassium permanganate is being dropped into it, which is a kind of purple colored dye. You can see it's initially starting off as a very dark purple color, so it slowly starts to spread out and spreads out even more until all the water is the same color. Now it's not as dark purple over here as it's not as dark over here as it was over here when it was more sort of packed together. So what we can say is that the dye is moving from an area of high concentration, which is like this, where the particles are densely packed together, and those particles have a little bit of kinetic energy, okay, which causes them to randomly kind of move around. We call that random movement Brownian motion. So they're moving around and lots of bumping into one another and bumping into different things, and it's going to cause them to move away from one another, okay, or spread out. So they're going to move from this high concentration, okay, to an area of low concentration. All right, so this is the high concentration, and they're going to be moving outwards, upwards, down here, all in different directions to this low concentration. Okay, until they reach what we call an equilibrium. So let's have a look at quite a closer look at a animation to see how that works. So here's the high concentration. You can see they've all got that little bit of energy. So they've all got this Brownian motion. They're moving around randomly. And you can see now they're moving across from one side to the other, okay, until they reach an equilibrium. So they've got 7 here and 7 over here. All right, so now they're in what we call equilibrium. Now you can see, as they're still moving randomly, okay, you might get one of these actually moving across this way, but that will be balanced by the random movement, which will cause one to move back this way. Okay, so there's going to be no net movement. So again, that definition is the net movement of molecules within a gas or a liquid from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration down a concentration gradient. And that is as a result of their random movement or their Brownian motion until the equilibrium is reached. Okay, so that is diffusion in a nutshell. Something that's very important, of course, is we need to know why diffusion is so important and why it is so incredibly important for our life processes. And the best example I can think of for that is diffusion in the alveoli tissue of the lungs. So what makes the alveoli tissue such an effective area for diffusion? Okay, well, most important things are that the distances that you've got for diffusion are very short. Okay, so the wall of the alveoli tissue is only 1 cell thick, as is the wall of the capillary that the oxygen is diffusing into. Okay, so that distance is very, very short. So very, very short distance is great for diffusion to occur. You've got the concentration gradients being maintained. Okay, remember, things move by diffusion from a very high concentration to a low concentration. So the red blood cells come in, they pick up the oxygen, and they very quickly then move away and they go back to the heart where they get pumped to the rest of the body. So that's maintaining a low concentration of oxygen in the capillaries next to the alveoli. And a high concentration, of course, is maintained in the alveoli by ventilation, by continuous breathing. And it's the same with the CO2. So the blood comes past the alveoli, drops off the CO2, Okay, so there's a high concentration of CO2 coming into the alveoli and a low concentration of CO2 maintained by breathing. Okay, and so CO2 diffuses back into the alveoli tissue. You've got a large surface area. So this alveoli, look, you can see this kind of balloon shape that it occupies. Okay, you've got a really large surface area. So more surface area in contact with the capillaries means faster rate of diffusion. So those three key concepts, okay, are very key for diffusion. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about what's diffusion in the lungs or diffusion in the leaf. Okay, all these three ideas are key. Diffusion distances being short, the maintenance of our concentration gradient, and the fact that we've got really, really large diffusion surfaces. Okay, so large surface area. All right, then moving on to our next type of transport. When this eventually catches up. Oh, hold on a minute. Okay, this is good. I can show you. Oh, no, I can't. I can show you on this and a little brief animation of how that happens. Okay, so the venous blood comes in, CO2 moves out, oxygen moves in, and the blood quickly moves away. Okay, really, really important. Okay, so you can see that diffusion and how quickly it's happening. Okay, so now it's time to talk about our second type of transport, and that is osmosis. You've talked about osmosis before, probably not in as much depth as you might discuss it now. So in osmosis, it's the movement of water. It's quite similar to diffusion, but we're always talking about water. Now, if we're going to define osmosis, it can be defined as the diffusion of water molecules, okay, from a region of high concentration of water to a region of low concentration of water, down the concentration gradient, through a partially permeable membrane, which is this membrane in the middle. Okay. Now again, we can probably look at an animation to see how that actually happens. So I'm just going to refresh this again, and let's have a look at osmosis. Okay, so you can see here, you've got a semi-permeable membrane in the middle. You've got molecules of sucrose, which is these red ones here, or molecules of a solute, which is dissolved in the water. And you've got the water itself. Okay, now I'm going to have to restart that because it happened a little bit too quickly. So keep an eye out now, so watch what happens. Okay, so you've got the low concentration of water over here and the high concentration of water over here. So water is moving from the right side over to the left side to balance that out. Okay, so here's a sucrose molecule in here. Important then to remember that sometimes it's very difficult to talk, gets a bit confusing to talk about a water concentration, because sometimes we forget to say the word water concentration and we just give the definition of the movement of water from a high concentration to low, which is not technically right because we could mean solute. So a more scientific term to use instead of water concentration is we can talk about the term water potential. So a solution with many water molecules has a high water potential. So this would be a high water potential. And a solution with a very few water molecules over here would have a low water potential. Okay, and we can say there is a water potential gradient which exists between the two. Okay, so you can define it either way. So movement of water from a high water potential to a low water potential, or a movement of water from a high water concentration to low water concentration. But you have to say the word water. Remember, it's down that concentration gradient through the membrane, which is this here. So how does that apply to living organisms, and where does it apply? One of the really important places where it applies, of course, is in the roots. The root hairs are critically important in the absorption of water and getting water up to the leaves. So imagine this is the soil, these are the root hair cells, these are the cells inside the root hair which are going to transport the water to the xylem. So in here you've got a high concentration of water and mineral ions, and in here you've got a low concentration. So water will move by osmosis into these root hair cells, okay, and then travel down the concentration gradient all the way to the xylem. Remember, the xylem is going to be moving water up the stem very, very quickly. So it's going to be the xylem will be maintaining that low concentration gradient, in it there. So there's always going to be a slightly higher water potential here than there is here. Then there's going to be a higher water potential here than there is here. Okay, a higher water potential here than there is here. All right, and that's maintained by the water being pulled up the xylem. And that's somewhere in the cell of where water concentration is very, very important. And that is also going to move in mineral ions. So there's going to be mineral ions which are dissolved in that water, and they will move in attached to the water. And that's also very important as well. Okay, thank you very much for listening. That's it.